us, the growth of our sports, and that applies to women's pro basketball, softball, and volleyball, we're only going to succeed if their profiles grow.
Jon Patricof.
The CEO and co-founder of Athletes Unlimited, Jon Patricof.
I'm Jon Patricof. Sports is big business.
Jon, thanks for joining me.
Of course, you have to start with what's good for the fan. I think that there's certainly truth to the fact that fans are interested in kind of short, intense competitions they can tune into. Also, when you're a fan, you want access to that sport year round.
Today on Portfolio Players, we sit down with Jon Patricof. He's the co-founder of Athletes Unlimited, a network of pro women's sports leagues. They've launched leagues for softball, volleyball, and basketball. The softball league has investment from Major League Baseball and a broadcast deal with ESPN. Patricof was the president of NYCFC before that. We had a lot to talk about when it comes to the investment boom in women's sports. Welcome back to Portfolio Players, presented by E-Trade from Morgan Stanley. I'm Dan Roberts here at Front Office Sports in New York, and today I've got Jon Patricof, the founder of Athletes Unlimited. Jon, thanks for joining me.
It's great to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Co-founder, I should say.
You should, absolutely.
And you have an important co-founder.
Absolutely.
It's been a big lift.
Jonathan and I have been side by side in this since the beginning.
So you've done a lot in your kind of history, your work track record, some of it sports, some of it not sports, a lot of it interesting. But let's just start with AU, with Athletes Unlimited, because there's so much there. Right now, 3 active sports: volleyball, softball, basketball. These are women's professional sports leagues in which the athletes have an equity stake, just in case anyone doesn't know. Talk to me about the origin story, getting it off the ground, especially because in many of these sports, you might already have one existing de facto giant. So how do you decide there's a chance here for us to come in and have a wedge?
Yeah, absolutely. So go back to 2018. I was running NYCFC, the pro soccer team here in New York. Gave me a great purview into global soccer and into women's soccer. Approached many times over the course of my tenure there. Always kind of passed on those investments, but I started to think a lot about where sports overall was going. I saw where MLS was going, and my eyes got open to kind of what I thought was this opportunity in women's sports that really wasn't being pursued. I went out, I left NYCFC really to pursue this. I spoke to a number of investors, partners, people involved in the ecosystem, and I have to tell you, back in 2018, really no one was very excited about the prospects for women's pro sports. And I was fortunate to find Jonathan Soros, who we just mentioned as my fellow co-founder, and I brought him the idea, and I said, what about getting involved in one of the existing pro women's sports leagues, owning a franchise, owning multiple franchises? And it was really Jonathan who said, if I want to do this, I think I believe in the thesis, Jon. Like, you've convinced me there's an opportunity here. This is undervalued, but I think we should start with a blank sheet of paper. And if we're going to go do this, I want to kind of control and be able to kind of control our destiny. I don't want to just be a team owner, part of an ecosystem. I really think we want to sit at the top. And so what is a business that we could create that would really make sense, that would capture the opportunity in pro women's sports, but also give us the ability to kind of chart our own path, control our own destiny? And that's what led to the business plan behind Athletes Unlimited, which was to create a series of short leagues that would complement the existing opportunities. You go back to, that era, WNBA players were all having to go overseas in the offseason. NWSL players weren't really making a living wage. And so our thought was, what if you came in and added to the existing ecosystems, or, created a new opportunity for players? And that's really the origin. We spent 2019 really working on that business plan, and we got to March of 2020 and we were ready to publicly announce it.
And then what happened?
Well, we announced March 3rd.
In March 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Like anyone needs a reminder. We literally announced on March 3rd of 2020. A week later, COVID hit. And we all went to our homes. Our office at that time was here in Midtown Manhattan. And I have to say, Jonathan and I kind of had some silent looks at each other because our strategy was to create these leagues to take place in one city, short duration, limited number of players, and really a big focus on media, TV rights, storytelling, content, less so than in-person attendance. And so for us, we looked at each other and said, did we really create something that actually might work by the time we get to August of 2020? And we were able to kind of keep moving. We paused a little in March. And I give Jonathan huge credit because as the largest investor and somebody who has really had to back this idea from the beginning, he never wavered. He basically saw this through. And, we launched in August of 2020 with best softball athletes in the world. The Olympics were canceled, kind of the calendar opened up. And then finally, ESPN came on board along with CBS as broadcast partners. They were they had been a little timid in the early days of kind of January, February, March when we were talking to them. But once they realized kind of what the landscape might look like, they were much more willing to take a risk on a new upstart. And again, August of 2020, we launched softball. It was a great success, and that kind of led to the launch of volleyball and then basketball and so forth.
So you accidentally stumbled on the COVID-friendly sports league model.
Yeah,
at the perfect time.
We really did. I mean, and as we all know from being in the business world, timing is really a huge part of everything. I like to believe that we did put a lot of work in. There was a really intentional plan around it, but I do think it really ultimately was a huge part of the success because people's minds about what pro sports looked like, what pro careers looked like, was in this period of flux and evolution. And so what I think would have probably happened in 2020 if we had launched and we were going to see through is we would have looked probably maybe, pretty quirky to people, right? We would have been in one location. We may have had a smaller audience or fewer people there. And against the backdrop of, MLB and college football and everything else that would have been happening, I think it would have looked a little strange. But as it turned out, we looked really, we fit the time.
I'll never forget the cutouts in the stands at baseball games.
Yeah, we didn't.
And you could place a cutout.
I mean, going back to 2020, we everything took place in Rosemont, Illinois, right outside Chicago. There was a pro softball venue there, and it was pretty wild. I mean, for many of those games, I was one of 2 or 3 people sitting in the stands, right, with just our umpires and coaches and of course the players and then a few staff members who were on the broadcast team or the social team. But those days are now kind of way behind us, but it's always good to kind of look back, remember where you came from. And it's a big piece of my job as, co-founder, CEO of the company to always kind of reflect on kind of what was the strategy initially, how has the market changed, and how do we adapt to it? And I think a lot has stayed the same, but also a lot's evolved.
How did the WNBA's success with the bubble or the wubble affect you guys? Because they also sort of stumbled into something great. I mean, some people really point to that as arguably either the moment or one of 2 moments that were a tipping point for the W.
I mean, I think it was a huge moment. I think that, it really put, it really elevated women's sports. I mean, what was interesting for me, right, as a kind of longtime business sports executive, even back in 2018, when I looked at the numbers, I looked at the WNBA numbers, I looked at certainly kind of international women's soccer numbers, I looked at the college softball numbers, which we should talk more about. But, you really had a lot of evidence of like audiences wanting to and watching these sports. But the market, doesn't always pay attention to data. I mean, it's not always the case that, we don't live in a situation where, there's, great information, everybody who analyzes that information the same way. Sometimes people ignore certain facts that are out there. And I think that was our opportunity kind of, as we were business planning and in the early days of AU. I think now that those days are kind of, in my opinion, well beyond us. We're in a different phase now where people recognize the opportunity around women's pro sports. And I think the WNBA certainly has led the way. But, even back then, you're right. You're talking about audiences that were larger than some men's sports, right? That you could look at college softball ratings and see they were ahead of, lots of men's sports or pro men's sports. And so lots of factors go into it. But, the way that those owners have persisted through a very long period of time, those players, of course, have persisted through a long period of time. I think the biggest moment, though, with respect to the wubble and the WNBA was really this crossover from those players being not only huge athletes on the court, but really having massive cultural relevance off the court. And that, I think, is probably one of the biggest shifts we've seen in sports since 2020. That's really, alongside the rise of social media, new platforms, and those athletes really have been at the forefront, women's basketball players.
So really a perfect storm, COVID, and also obviously the social justice moment.
Absolutely. And I think, that was just incredibly organic, true to who those women were, and new media platforms that allowed them to get those messages out, and their willingness and their bravery and their ability to stand up for what they believed in. And I think that resonated with fans. And nonetheless, that became national news, and it put the W right in the middle of it.
When you talk about how the moment has changed in terms of investing in women's sports, it was an uphill battle for you guys at first, and we can talk about that, how you went about investment and partnerships. But when you look now, is it almost like the pendulum has swung so much that now the pressure is on and the expectations are too great? Because now maybe it's not as hard to get funding or buy-in for women's sports, but if anything, people expect much more rapid success.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I definitely take this dynamic versus the dynamic that existed before. There's clearly a lot more capital. There's clearly a lot more people who recognize the opportunity, a lot more media partner interest. So all of that's just great, great dynamics, great for us, great for women's sports, great for women athletes. So I never complain about that at all. I think that there is a reality, though, of as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as someone out raising capital. I mean, I think we have always tried to present, realistic and in some cases conservative business plans. And I think that that's certainly the case that you can sometimes be in the marketplace where other people are putting forth other types of business plans. But I think a lot of the capital, I mean, we're really seeing two big segments of the market, right? There's certainly a number of new emerging leagues. AU now is kind of an older emerging league, if you get, because in 2020 we were probably the only emerging league in that year, if that's fair to say. I haven't gone back and done it, but it might be the case. Maybe 21, and then 22, 23, 24. You've seen a lot of new upstarts. So we're a little bit earlier in that growth spurt, but you're seeing a lot of that capital that's coming into the market going into the bigger, more established leagues. And ultimately, I think it's about scale. I think scale is really important, and I think there's a great pathway for emerging leagues, but I think that we're clearly going to go through lots of transition, and that follows the pathway of every major sports that that's existed in the United States. I mean, you can look at the history of the NBA or the history of the NFL and the history of Major League Baseball, and you have to be a historian. I mean, you really have to go back and look at the earlier part of the 20th century, but those were very dynamic business situations, right? With mergers and changes and new people coming in and people going out, changes to the business model. And so there's no reason to expect that that won't continue in women's sports.
When you talk about the new upstart leagues, if you will, of the last few years, and I think of, especially in the last year or 2 years, as unrivaled basketball. There's TGL in golf, which is indoor and, have simulator. And I actually think what's really smart, and you guys share this view, is the short self-contained season. And I think what we've seen is that the baseball season is really, really long. And the NBA season is really, really long. And the NHL regular season is really, really long. And we've written at FOS about, the ratings going up and down and the difficulties, especially that the NHL and NBA have had with keeping the All-Star game exciting. NBA has tried the in-season tournament or in-season cup. NHL with its All-Star game, even the Winter Classic, they've done all these cool venues and they just kind of can't get big ratings. And so, I guess what I wonder is the future in these shorter one-off self-contained seasons where it's more exciting because there's only going to be 18 games or whatever it is.
Yeah, so that was absolutely the original thesis behind Athletes Unlimited back in 2019, 2020. 100% we just said seasons were getting too long. What if we came in and created, a short season, one location, and really put all the intensity around that? I have to say, my thinking around that has evolved a lot. One of the things we knew at the beginning at AU, and I think said it earlier, but is the importance of scale. So I did know from the beginning that 1 5 or 6 week season in softball would not be enough, in my opinion, to get the interest from national advertisers, sponsors, and even fans. And that if you want to build kind of a world-class organization, it was going to be hard to do up against just 1 5 week season. And so that was why the plan originally was for a network of pro leagues, why we wanted to launch. That gave us a lot of scale in terms of the number of games. It gave us scale in terms of year-round reach. And I'm still a huge believer in the importance of scale. And so I think that's what you're seeing right now. Look at TGL, right? They're expanding with a women's property. You're seeing most pick out some other leagues who are kind of expanding into other areas. And I think we're in this period of significant, probably consolidation, rapid increase in scale. Everyone's trying to grow and become bigger. Of course, you have to start with what's good for the fan. And I think that there's certainly truth to the fact that fans are interested in kind of short, intense, competitions they can tune into. But fans also, when you're a fan, you want access to that sport year round, and you want it 24/7. And I think for a lot of for men's sports fans who've followed the NFL their whole life, or the NBA, it's hard to understand what it's like historically to have been a women's softball fan, a pro softball fan. I mean, you can't, there's very few places to find information, few places to follow your favorite players. So our view originally was our season was going to sit alongside other pro softball properties, or in basketball, our 5-week competition would sit alongside the WNBA. And so I've always believed that fans want to consume their sport, then they love it, 365, 24/7, but what competition format, how does that fit in with the overall ecosystem, I think is to be determined.
Well, and if you look at spring football, like it's a question still, I think, whether there is unlimited year-round appetite for more.
Yeah, except almost every sports property out there would be happy to get 500, 600, 700,000 people tuning in, or 400,000. I mean, those ratings that you can get for spring football still, outpace a lot of big pro sports events that happen at other times. So I'm pretty confident football fans, and they may not want to tune in at a certain scale, and the business may not make sense. That's the reality, right? Spring football, even if it gets 400, 500, 600,000 viewers, may not be a good business, and that's where we get into this kind of question mark of what's good for the fan, what's good for the athlete, and then ultimately what's good for the business. And at AU, I think you have to start with obviously what the fan wants, but you have to also think about what's good for the athletes, and that I guess has been a really important part of the AU business plan and the strategy from the beginning, which was to partner with the athletes. And you mentioned it. It's not just the equity ownership, but it's also the governance and day-to-day management. And that was probably the pivotal moment. I mean, COVID, and as we talked about earlier, was a pivotal moment. But in the planning process for AU, probably the pivotal moment was a meeting we had in 2019, September of 2019. We'd been working on the business plan for AU for a number of months. We'd been kind of talking to a lot of advertisers, executives, talking about the sport. And it was Sherry Kemp, who's now is our chief broadcast officer. At that time, she was leading our softball efforts. And she said, we need to get a group of players together to talk to them about what we want to do. And so they came to New York. We had 5 pro players, and we spent a day with them. And it honestly changed the trajectory of AU. Permanently. We took, after that day, we said, we want to bring you all on as consultants, and we want to create kind of a body that we'll talk to weekly. That led into what we call our player executive committee. And to this day, in each of our sports, there is a player executive committee selected by the fellow players that myself and our senior executives meet with weekly to talk about every aspect of what we're doing in that sport. And that really changed the trajectory, because you got to get the relationship with the athletes, the alignment with the athletes right. And I think that's been a core piece of
well, and the W is dealing with this right now with the CBA negotiations.
Every league is dealing with it. I think that we're probably
baseball too. Baseball.
Everybody. I mean, and listen, and our philosophy was, it was actually, in some respects, it's a huge issue right now at the W, but really you actually saw it in women's soccer back in 2020, 2021, 2022 in a significant way, when you were dealing with serious issues of, way players were treated, playing conditions, really the gap between, some really basic standards of quality and how the players were just being sidelined. And I think that we were incredibly fortunate. I don't think we ever would have gotten to a place like that at AU, knowing myself and Jonathan and kind of our philosophy. But nonetheless, like partnering with the players and being able to talk to them weekly allowed us to avoid so many mistakes. And that's been our North Star through and through. It led to our expansion last year from our 5-week softball season into what we now call the AUSL, which is creating a longer season for them. And that now, we've partnered with MLB on and has been great. But that's also I think one of the biggest things we're seeing in pro sports overall, which is this: we're living in a world where the value of the athletes, the importance of the athletes has come right to the center. And that, I think, in many regards is the biggest innovation and the biggest thing that we were ahead of the curve on at AU, because we always say that meeting in 2019, I don't think, up until that point, I don't think another group of entrepreneurs or franchise owners had ever started a league and talked to the players before they launched. Like, I really don't believe they were involved. It was always like, you'd find the funders, you'd find a couple executives.
It's the suits.
You'd suit. The suits would set up the league, and then you'd hire the players, and you'd assume they'd come. And in our case, we really co-built it together, and they deserve as much credit as anyone. And we've benefited, immensely from that.
When you talk about working closely with the athletes, I mean, in your leagues, you also in many cases have athletes who are only just out of college.
Yep.
We had Deja Kelly on this series. She played in college, played for a moment in the W, and then ended up in Athletes Unlimited. There's this sort of chaos happening in college sports, right? I mean, you have players who they go pro, and then in some cases they're able to go back or trying to go back. They all want another season. They're advocating. There's multiple lawsuits we're tracking between players and the NCAA, players in their own teams. I mean, Duke sued its quarterback, Darian Mensah. Just as we record this, they just settled, and he's going to go to Miami. I mean, what do you make of all that, especially as a league that, for your business, you're kind of courting athletes just as they come out of college in some cases?
I mean, I think that from our perspective, every athlete that's playing in AU up until this point has been a pro athlete, right? They've graduated, they're finished with their NCAA eligibility. And as we've talked about, like in the case of basketball, a vast majority of those players are playing in the WNBA. So this is another professional opportunity. In the case of softball, some players have played in other leagues in other parts of the world. But for us, we think very much about how we can help build their personal brands and their personal identities. And we've actually evolved our thinking a lot on this. I mean, one of the things we took to the marketplace and took to partners in particular was this idea that as AU, we were the league, we were the teams. In the case, prior to the AUSL, we didn't have teams, but now we do. We own all 6 teams in the AUSL. And we also have these very close relationships with the athletes, where in some cases we have their marketing rights, or in some cases they may be at a place like a sport like volleyball or softball where there's been a less commercialized opportunity for them. And so we've always tried to bring them with us to advertisers and partners for their own benefit. But for us, the growth of our sports, and that applies to women's, pro basketball, which is still at the top in terms of popularity and awareness, but also of course, with softball and volleyball in the same way. We're only going to succeed if their profiles grow and get bigger and their audiences get bigger. So we actually have a dedicated team at AU that is literally focused on just helping those athletes supplement the efforts of their managers, supplement their efforts of their agents, whoever else, in terms of helping them grow their social profiles, helping them with their content initiatives. And, someone like Deja, who's incredible, on the court and off the court, we just want to basically build up her presence and profile, even if we don't have a direct commercial benefit from that, because we see the indirect benefit that comes with it.
But you also don't want to just be a feeder to the bigger pros, right? I mean, you don't want Athletes Unlimited basketball to be a G League back to the WNBA.
Yeah, and right now it's not. I mean, I think it's never been that. But I will say that when we started basketball, the player executive committee, and I come back to this, and that included, a number of great players, some of whom are still playing with us, and others who aren't. They always said they wanted this to be a place for WNBA players in the offseason, so they didn't have to go overseas. But they also wanted to create some room for players who, like Deja, maybe hadn't yet gotten their shot in the W. And their reality was at that time 144 players in the WNBA. There's just not enough slots for all the great talent that's out there. And certainly when you look at even where expansion is in some of the bigger women's pro leagues, you're still talking about, half to a third of the number of teams that are in a men's pro league in the US. And so you're talking about very few slots. There's huge talent. There's great talent coming out of college. It's getting better and better. And there's still not enough great places to play. And so for us, we'd always like to keep some room in that in the case of basketball. In the case of softball, we are the pro league in the United States. Yeah. We have, I think it's like 98% of the national team plays with AUSL. I think maybe there's one player who's not on our roster. And then effectively, if you look at kind of the great talent that's coming out of the college pipeline, and this class that's going to be graduating soon has some absolutely massive, probably the biggest generational talent we've seen yet. We've had all of them come right out of college into literally our season starts like 3 days after the College World Series. And so these players play all season, get a very little break, and then they come play with athletes. Yes, absolutely. And she's a massive star, at Texas Tech, and, got a lot of attention for her $1 million NIL deal. But there's a lot of other talent as well that Carlin Pickens, who's thrown the fastest, pitch and recorded in college softball history. College softball is a juggernaut on ESPN, and it's like over 1,500 games a year, and those ratings are at the top of the heap when you look at not just women's sports, but when you even look at men's college sports as well, it's a high ranking audience across the country, and we saw that was kind of the evidence early on, and that obviously has now led. If you fast forward, ESPN came on board, as I mentioned, in 2020, but it all kind of has now led to the biggest commercial deal we did to date, which was our new 3-year partnership with ESPN, which will have 50 of our 90 softball games on ESPN networks, including ABC. The vast majority will be on ESPN and ESPN2. So this is massive national exposure, and the sport, warrants it.
With softball, it seems to me that in a very short time, you got not only the ESPN deal, and now, as you said, the latest reworking of that, but also Major League Baseball investment. And MLB had said somewhere something like, we were eyeing softball anyway, or they were going to do their own softball thing. So was this, we hit on the model? Was it timing? Was it also the fact that that sport was getting more popular at the exact right time? And so instead of having to launch our own thing, we can invest in this other one. But MLB investment in it is big.
Yeah. I mean, I forget the exact expression, but it's how, things take a very long time and then they happen all at once. Yes. Right. So, I mean, my first conversations back with MLB were with Kim Ng, who is now our commissioner, who is an absolute legend in the sports management world and incredible person. But my first conversations were back with Kim in 2019 when we were starting to think about softball and getting connected with all the different people. And I started to speak to Kim and say, hey, here's our idea for what we want to do in softball. MLB had always supported the sport at a grassroots level, but they'd kind of stayed away from the pro landscape. And Kim and I had some great conversations. And at that time we said, hey, listen, what do you want MLB involvement to be? They, like many leagues at the time, wanted to take a wait and see approach and didn't want to cast their, put their chips in with anybody in particular. Well, fast forward, we always had a nice relationship with MLB. We kept it going. And then when we had the idea internally to kind of shift AU softball presence into the AUSL, this was during 2024. We did that work with the players. We did that work, obviously, Jonathan, myself, our leadership team. And then we decided that we really wanted to go out and find somebody to lead this new league. And honestly, I tried hard to recruit her. She had just, left the Marlins. She was going to take some time off. And our first conversation, I told her what we were up to and that we were thinking about launching the AUSL and expanding softball. And she kind of was a little, I'm taking time. I'm going to see. And then I called her back a week later. I said, you have to do this.
Never the time off.
So she came on as an advisor in June of 24. We announced the AUSL in Oklahoma City at the College World Series and said we'd be launching in 2025. And then the conversations with MLB started soon thereafter with, thanks to CAA, who has been a great advisor and partner with us and has done a lot of work with MLB. They put us together. And, to their credit, the commissioner and Deputy Commissioner Noah Garden, I mean, they were really open and interested, and the conversation started, and they've been great. And it all culminated last June, in June of 25, a few days before our opening pitch of the AUSL, and they were on board, and they've been amazing partners, and a huge moment for us, and incredible partnership.
Why didn't lacrosse work out?
So we launched lacrosse as our second league after softball, and we had great success with lacrosse as well. ESPN in particular, really behind that sport. They've been really behind it on the men's side.
Fast rising sport.
Fast rising sport. I would say really a couple things. One is with any of these sports, the calendar and the players, like availability and their situations is always a big factor. And we face it in all the sports. It's actually, like, in many respects, if you look at international soccer, this topic comes up all the time, right? Where you're seeing, players really, like, now almost literally 12 months a year, there being demands on their time, right? With international competitions, Champions League. And lacrosse, the window is very small. It was only really the summer months because almost all the other players had, other obligations as coaches and otherwise. And so with the sport getting back into the Olympics and with international competitions, the windows for the sport for us to run the season were getting smaller and smaller. And so that was really a big consideration we had. And for us, we love what we did. We're really proud of the contributions we made. I think we all along had great relationships with all the players. And it's great to see kind of them continuing on with the WPLL and hopefully, having great success and continuing there. So we're happy to see that sport continue to grow. But I think for AU, that's the reality. I mean, for us, it is really important to have scale and to be present, in many have a significant presence, number of athletes, number of games, times of year. But what that looks like may in fact shift, and you've got to be responsive to the marketplace. I mean, that's just a reality. But as I said, it all starts back with the players and what they're looking for and what they wanted. And that's how we got to the AUSL again with this shift. I mean, we've been running this 5-week season in softball. And the players kept coming to us and saying, listen, we'd love to play more. We'd like to play more. There had been a couple of other fledgling pro softball leagues that existed while we existed as well. When we launched initially in 2020, there was something called the NPF, and it was up and running. They ended up not doing their season in 2020 because of COVID, and they never came back. And then another league tried. And so what we realized was there was a big opportunity here. Women's sports had matured to a level where we thought, the business could support more games, and that if we weren't going to do it, somebody else was going to come in. So that's led to our expansion in softball, and it's done incredibly well.
With basketball, there is a lot happening abroad right now. The NBA wants to do EuroLeague. There's also Project B. And again, we go back to what can the market support and how many different leagues. What do you make overall of these efforts? Specifically, what do you make of Project B?
Yeah. So, this is that we live in and it's what makes sports so fun, right? I mean, sports, entertainment, media, these are dynamic industries with lots of new dynamics that come up. I mean, distribution's a huge piece, content's a huge piece, new products are a huge piece. I mean, so when we launched AU Pro Basketball in 2021, we were the only, domestic 5-on-5 opportunity for pro women athletes. The only other opportunity for basketball players was to go overseas and play in Russia and China, other parts of Europe. We existed that way. Unrivaled came along. Now Project B is being discussed and will presumably launch next year and have started signing players. I think that it speaks to the opportunity. I mean, I think how exactly it all comes together, how it works with this new CBA and if the CBA happens. But I think we love and think it's a great indication that more people want to be in the space and there's more basketball out there. And ultimately, you have to put together a business plan and a product that, as I said, works for the fans, works for the athletes. One thing I've never liked about, businesses I've been in, and it's tendency we all fall into. Back in my days, prior to sports, I was at the Tribeca Film Festival. And we'd often worry about what was the Toronto Film Festival doing? Or what was the Sundance Film Festival doing? And you think about competition. And I just think that's the wrong way to think about it. Women's basketball is competing in a massive sea of pro sports and entertainment. And so ultimately, if your sector of that opportunity doesn't grow, if women's interest in women's pro basketball doesn't grow, then we're just going to continue to be a small fish in that small pond. And so the real goal and the primary thing that has to happen is the market opportunity has to grow. So you need women's basketball to grow. You need new investment. It's going to create confusion. But I think fans today are a lot more sophisticated and a lot more aware than they were, 10, 20 years ago. If you look at international soccer, which again, I benefit from a lot, and the way I think about things is, if you're a historical basketball fan in the United States or a pro football fan, you think of, there's just one league in the world. Every player plays in that league, and that's kind of it. But I came and had the experience at NYCFC and being part of City Football Group and having exposure to global football is to realize that there are 25 plus leagues around the world, and there's in the UK, Champions League, and their domestic cup competitions, and there's the Club World Cup, and there's the World Cup, and fans can figure it out. Although
it is confusing sometimes, but yeah. Especially with soccer.
It's funny, but it's really not confusing to a fan of the sport, right? If somebody's in it, they do get it, and they want more of it, and so I think that for us, and we're nowhere near that situation in women's pro sports, but like in women's basketball, we're still talking, again, even if there's every opportunity for Project B and there's every opportunity for Unrivaled and Athletes Unlimited and the WNBA and International Basketball, it's still a very small ecosystem compared to what other sports have at their disposal. It's still a very few number of opportunities compared to what pro men's athletes have who want to play those sports. And so I think it's just I think I can't let myself be in that narrow space of just worrying about, who else is competing or doing something in the women's pro basketball space. It's much more about how we're going to grow the sport, how do we grow overall interest, and how do we elevate these athletes and give them the right platforms. And, some will compete, some will collaborate. And we've had a great relationship with the WNBA, I will say. I think they saw this in certain regards with us. ESPN is our broadcast partner this year, but the WNBA is also going to be broadcasting many of the games on their app. And they've done that now. I think it's the third year that they're doing that. And you'll see social coverage of them. You'll, by the way, see that in volleyball. We operate a volleyball league. There are two other, pro volleyball leagues in the United States. You go on our volleyball channels today, yesterday, you'll see us talking about our athletes in those leagues, and those leagues will do the same thing about us. And so I think that's the healthy attitude, and ultimately the fans decide and the players decide, right? The fans will either tune into your competition or not. Project B, is in that moment which every startup enjoys, which is there's always attention on the new. There's always excitement about what, something mysterious. It's exciting that they're obviously signing great players, and that's terrific. But, the proof will be in the pudding. And none of these businesses survive based on how they do prior to launch, certainly. Even year one and year two don't really determine kind of the long-term success. This is about, we're building, I hope everybody out there is trying to build long-term sustainable businesses. And that's always been a kind of, home bedrock principle of ours, which is we're trying to build something. I had the benefit again of being in, coming from soccer, seeing what the economics looked like around, Major League Soccer teams. And so when I sat down with Jonathan initially, I was very forthcoming about how long this would take. The business plan was always a 10-year plan. It was never, we're going to turn a profit in year two or year three. And so I think the systems evolve, but there still are, and I really caution people who come into, emerging sports leagues and think they're going to, build a league and turn a profit immediately.
Right. I got a couple more for you. So something we talk about on this series all the time, of course, is the rise in athlete and celebrity investors in sports. They all want to own a piece of a team. You guys sort of haven't used that model or needed sort of the celebrity involvement model. I mean, is that something that you could do eventually, is sell each franchise to someone as an owner? Of course, maybe that flies in the face of the athlete equity model.
Yes. So the athletes, who play in Athletes Unlimited are earning profits interest in the company. So exactly right. I mean, our vision from the beginning, and this is something that Jonathan actually has created, is we are a public benefit corporation, which is an interesting concept for a pro sports organization. What that means is that we're able to take into account like all our stakeholders besides just the shareholders. But as part of that, Jonathan came up with a capital structure called Mission Equity, where all of our investors who come into AU basically set a cap on their returns. They basically say, listen, once I get to a 15% IRR or a 10% IRR or whatever it is, I'm happy with that IRR, I'm happy with that return, and I'm willing to share the upside above that back with the athletes, the community, everybody else. And so that has been kind of a bedrock principle of ours, which is this idea that, yes, the shareholders absolutely should benefit. They should get their money back. They should earn a profit. But that he believes, and I think we all believe, that there's a certain point at which those investors are prepared to share those upsides with all the partners. And so the athletes are going to benefit alongside everyone else as we go. I think that our focus, like you said, has not been trying to attract a lot of celebrity investors to our venture. We've got some great other investors. MLB, of course, is now a foundational partner in the AUSL. And we have a great cap table of a number of family offices, sports investors. Some people are from outside of sports. But I think we've never really tried to focus too much on the celebrity impact from those investors. I mean, in a lot of cases, it's been great to see them really support and build their teams. In others, it's a kind of one and done. And again, not trying to chase the press release, really trying to make sure we think about what's right and what's sustainable. And I think at the end of the day, you want investors who are really in this for the long term, ideally who have a lot of capital also at their disposal, because as I said, these are capital intensive undertakings. And so trying to manage having a big, massive cap table with having the right investors around the table. We are likely to shift some of what we do, because I think that historically we've invested, everybody's come in at the Athletes Unlimited level, or now with MLB at the AUSL level, at the league level. And I do think over time, when it's right, we will move to a model where each team will maybe have its own investors, and people will be able to invest more directly in a team. When and how that happens, still to be determined. I think our single entity model is the model for success that most emerging leagues that are seeing good results are taking, and I think it's a smart one. Allows for consistency and make sure that you kind of have parity across the board, make sure you have a hand in kind of the quality of the experience that the fans have, that the athletes have. And so I think it's really important. But I think we're always open-minded. Things have to shift. You have to be flexible. And I think we've done that, now over the last 5 years at AU, and I think we'll continue. I think the pace of change and the pace of adaptation will continue at a even more rapid pace.
3 sports right now. How quickly would you go into another, and what do you have your eye on?
Yeah, I think that I'm not spending a lot of time right now. I'm spending any time really talking about new sports that we would add to the mix. I think we've just really triple down in softball. And I think we see much more opportunity there. Our business plan has us, we went from 4 teams this year to 6. This upcoming season, expansion of that league is absolutely on our mind. We're heading into 2028 with the Olympics. We think that's going to be a big catalyst for the sport, and we're kind of prepared for expansion beyond that. How do we expand that season? As you said, yes, some of these seasons have gotten really long. We're still playing a very short softball season, relatively speaking. Teams will be playing, 24, 25 games. The season only really runs for 3 months. So we're trying to think about how we can expand there. And then I think in basketball and volleyball, there's a very dynamic and huge opportunity there, and we're going to figure out kind of how to play those. But we got a lot on our plate, and like I said, back to 2020, it was important to be in at that time 4 sports, early days. Each of them was a relatively small opportunity. Though the size of that market, the size of that opportunity has grown dramatically, or at least the market's recognition of those, and so we got to be ready to seize the opportunities in the sports we're in.
I want to ask about your dad, Jon Patricof. Yeah. For those who don't know, Graycroft, the grandfather of venture capital. What did you learn from him in business? And, you did not end up spending your career in the VC world. Yeah.
So, he and I speak, once a day. My dad is 91 now. He just completed a marathon a couple of years ago, oldest person to run a New York City marathon. And he's still, up before me, and he's out late at night after me. He's endless, boundless energy. But he's been an incredible father. I have 2 brothers who are both very successful in their own right. Mark's in the sports and investment world with Patricof Co. My brother Jamie's a really accomplished film and TV producer. And he's just been a great supporter. I think one of the great things is in a world where a lot of people tell you no, or why you can't do something, or what you're doing wrong, he's always been somebody who has encouraged each of my activities. He gives very honest and direct advice. He's known for that, telling people how it is. But he's been a great supporter, and I think you need that. You need that in your family and your spouse. My wife has been a huge supporter of mine professionally. My dad's been right there. I've also been really fortunate to have my 2 brothers do the same, and I think that's a really important part of life and success and business. And what I've been spending my time on is professionally is a huge part of my life. And so to have a father who supports you in that regard and is just always encouraging you and, being honest, but also at the same time thinking positively has been terrific. And, he's an example for me and a lot of people about certainly about how to live a long, successful life. And he's also had to have multiple careers. You mentioned Graycroft, but right, he had Apex, which he started back in the 70s. And I remember the very early days of the venture world and how hard that was and the problems he'd bring home from entrepreneurs. And so I saw kind of the less glory days of VC and I remember what that was like. And then with Graycroft, Raycroft, and then Primetime Partners, which he launched only a few years ago with a new partner. I mean, none of us have to stop. We keep going. And, I'm now in whatever chapter I am of my career, from my early days at Disney to Tribeca to NYCFC, now to AU. And I think this will be a very long chapter, but I don't think it's going to be the last.
Let's end on this. What's your best advice for people, either investment, business, career advice?
I think we hit it. I mean, I think you need to surround yourself with great people. I mean, I think I've been really fortunate at Athletes Unlimited to have Jonathan as a partner. I mentioned kind of the role my dad had, my wife. I mean, but I think of Jonathan as we really wouldn't have been able to accomplish this without one another. And we're really fortunate to be surrounded by an incredible team at AU and a great senior leadership team. And that team has grown and kind of leveled up in a lot of ways over the years. But having Jonathan there side by side has been really a key part. And I'd say to anybody who's like launching a new business or thinking about a new venture, I think finding a great partner is really essential, and somebody who you can debate things with and maybe don't see eye to eye, but ultimately somebody who you really have the trust of and respect of, and then you can kind of come to it. I can't imagine how entrepreneurs do it on their own entirely. It just, seems impossible to me. But he's been a great model of a partner, somebody who's been very supportive, who, we've worked really well together. And so that, I think, is great. If you're gonna go out and start a new venture, find a good partner.
Team.
Good
team. Jon, thanks so much.
Thanks
Great stuff.
Great to see you. Thanks.